Hello, everybody. My name is Anja Kadim, consultant barrister at Unit Chambers, and welcome to our podcast, Family Law and More. Today with me, I am joined by Daniela Mizzen, my co-wellbeing officer at Unit Chambers, and Anushka Kangesi, who is a barrister at 3DJB in London and is the wellbeing panelist for the Young Bar and member of the Bar Council. In today's podcast, we are going to be focusing on the legal sector and wellbeing and breaking the silence on stress and mental health. In terms of what we will be discussing today, we are going to be looking at really the reality of stress and burnout in the legal profession and how widespread the issue is, as well as focusing on the cultural challenges in the bar and why mental health would still be a taboo topic, and also looking at practical strategies for maintaining well-being. So, Anushka, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. So I think to start, I think maybe it'd be helpful for our listeners to know a little bit about you and about how well-being has become important to you as a topic.
So I'm a barrister at 3DJB, which is in London, practicing predominantly in family law. And I'm an elected member of the Young Bar. And through that, really, I'm involved with the Wellbeing panel. And that's why I sit on the Wellbeing panel, really, as the Young Bar rep. I'm also an elected member of the Bar Council too.
All right. I think maybe just to start off our conversation, I'd just be grateful if you could help us with focusing on really the question of how big is the well-being problem in law, and any sorts of insights you can share with us, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly well-being is a topic that's gathered momentum in the years that I've been practicing at the bar. And touching on how big a problem it is, the Wellbeing at the Bar report, which was published last year in 2024, set out that there was an improvement in some areas compared to 2021. In general terms, barristers were reporting high levels of work satisfaction and well-being than in 2021. But notwithstanding that, there were some pretty stark statistics captured by that report. About a third of respondents said they weren't coping with managing workload. Over a third of respondents felt down or in low spirits, and over 1/4 of respondents indicated that they had low levels of psychological well-being. And certainly in terms of trends, female barristers, more junior practitioners, and those from an ethnic minority background had an overall lower well-being. And in terms of practice areas, criminal practitioners and family law barristers had a lower overall well-being compared to other areas. And I think generally the trend was that as barristers got older, they had higher levels of well-being compared to younger groups. So certainly that was a concern from a young bar perspective. And in terms of general trends, really, the self-employed bar had a lower well-being rate compared to those practitioners who were practicing solely at the employed bar. So yeah, as I say, some pretty stark statistics there. And I think certainly from a Bar Council perspective, wellbeing is very much a key priority. They recognise that it's a big challenge, and particularly it's a key priority for the chair of the bar this year, Barbara Mills Casey.
I think from your perspectives as barristers, obviously it is a very, very demanding job. So what do you think makes the legal profession so kind of uniquely stressful as such?
I mean, I think we have to recognise that the bar is a demanding profession. It's hugely rewarding, but equally it can be really tough. It involves working at unconventional times of the day, a high amount of travel, where you can be, sent to courts across the country. You're dealing with the unpredictability of litigation, late papers, long hours. The subject matter in of itself can be difficult. I think these all contribute to sometimes making the profession a high-performing and perhaps challenging place to work. And I think particularly for juniors starting out, if you're in chambers, you're navigating what it is to be self-employed, you're fostering relationships with professional clients and lay clients, and you're managing a caseload. So it's a lot to juggle. And I think from a self-employed perspective, you're also trying to maintain a busy practice, not upset clients or solicitors or clerks or colleagues. And that can then impact a work-life balance. I mean, I think litigation in of itself is adversarial in nature. And that can perhaps make it feel daunting, particularly when you first start out, to generate relationships at the bar. So, I think for those reasons, it can be very stressful. And I think certain areas of law, in particular crime and family, they bring with it not only academic pressures, but also emotional pressures too. And we're starting now to recognise that there's a vicarious trauma being experienced by many in the profession. And certainly it would help for support systems to be in place for those that need it, like coaching or supervision, so that was sort of in regular practice for them.
Yeah, I think probably what I'd add on to that point, and I completely echo everything that Anushka's saying. I think in terms of how you start off as a barrister, part of what makes a component of the career is about how you are focusing on building your reputation, not only just amongst solicitors, but also amongst the judiciary. And I think that what you want to do is I think that having a situation where you are going the extra mile for your case and for your client has become the norm. And of course, that then carries with it the pressures that then get put on you, especially like longer hours and harder work that you put into it.
Yeah. And I think, since the pandemic, remote working and that kind of injection of technology that's come to the bar in more recent years has a number of positives. People are working with a paperless practice. There's less travel. It's potentially much more flexible, but it also can have quite negative impacts. And I think with this newer cohort of junior practitioners, a lot of them would have had an almost entirely remote pupillage. And in terms of well-being, there are, of course, different challenges that brings. And they haven't had a pupillage like I did, for example, where I could talk to people after court, because they were back in chambers, or I'd learn a lot through osmosis sitting in the same room as colleagues. And I think for those juniors where those support systems aren't in place, those kind of communication channels remotely, it can be very difficult to develop professional relationships and therefore feel a lot more overwhelming and perhaps lonely or isolating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as well, probably I know that obviously COVID has passed a number of years now, to be honest. But I think, and certainly when I started in a COVID pupillage, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So everything was remote. In fact, actually my first time being in person in court was actually when I became a tenant. And I think that when you were carrying those situations with COVID, I felt that there was a situation where most people in society were just sort of conditioned to be at home, not conditioned not to really go out and socialize, because of course those are the rules there. And it was sometimes a little bit difficult to, I think, shake it off really. So then it obviously creates those sorts of situations where perhaps you don't think to try and put yourself in more opportunities to socialise with other barristers and also to socialise with people from chambers really that much. But I think we have shaken off a little bit, but I think it did contribute a little bit to it as well.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of some of the ways that we practice in, the instant nature of things like emails, that's very much the norm now. And with that comes the added demand and pressure, doesn't it, in terms of the expectation of immediate replies, and that can be very stressful and overwhelming, particularly when you're starting out.
And I think probably just another point that comes into my head really is that, there has now become this culture, and certainly in terms of the bar, in which we're obviously putting ourselves through a lot of work and a big high workload. It's probably fair to say we all know that it's important to keep a work-life balance, but it all seems to be the case where these themes still persist of putting yourself under a lot of work and pressure. And do you have any kind of thoughts about why it keeps persisting really, and why barristers keep putting themselves in that position?
I don't know whether it's putting themselves in that position. I think it's a combination of lots of things. Something actually, I think that a lot of the qualities that attract a lot of people to the bar, determination, drive, attention to detail, do also have the potential to manifest harmly. I think, at times when the job is particularly demanding, I know that in this series you've touched on imposter syndrome or perfectionism, and I think those qualities can potentially lean towards those tendencies. But I think there is a lot to juggle, and if boundaries aren't put in place in terms of your mental health and well-being, you do sort of find yourself back in that position of it feeling completely relentless, I think.
I think an important side of things that we've been really trying to focus on in Chambers is actually breaking down the stigma around kind of discussing stress, burnout, and kind of the status of your mental health. But I think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of understanding the reasons why so many people in the legal sector struggle to talk about their mental health. I think we're always kind of looking out for new ways that we can start those conversations in kind of like a safe space. And I just wondered, did you have any kind of ideas on how we can continue to kind of break down the stigma, or also like why you think those stigmas, I guess, specifically within the legal sector as well, because I know it is a sector that does struggle to talk about these things, why that is the case?
I mean, certainly from meeting junior practitioners, I think generally amidst young practitioners, there's very much a feeling that stress equals weakness. So I think, one of the issues is how we view stress. I don't think there's, a perfect answer to the solution to that, but certainly normalising it, speaking about it and making sure that support systems are in place so that people don't feel abnormal when they experience stress at the bar would certainly be a starting point, I guess.
And do you think that it's important as well that I think in terms of senior leaders amongst circuits and certainly heads of chambers probably needs to play a part in helping to shift that culture, really?
Yeah, definitely. And that sort of goes back to what I was saying about, a lot of young practitioners with remote working and perhaps a remote pupillage, that kind of opportunity to meet and foster relationships with more senior members of the bar. It is harder. And so, obviously what we want is for juniors to stay. We want them to be retained. We want them to become experienced practitioners and then in turn kind of mentor people themselves that come later. What we don't want is to lose lots of junior barristers because they are exhausted or burnt out.
And I think just a question that arises from that. I mean, from your experience at the moment of being a part of the Bar Council and a member of the Young Bar, do you have like a bit of a knowledge of how chambers just broadly are trying to deal with issues of well-being? How are they putting things into place in terms of policy?
Yes. I mean, in terms of Bar Council initiatives, something that Young Bar put together is the Starting Out Guide for barristers. And this is barristers just starting out in their practice, which is a really helpful go-to if you're beginning your career. I think second to that, I would say that there are a lot of resources that are available through the Bar Council, which, people don't always know about them. Sort of, for example, Talk to Spot. I don't know whether you've both come across that in your practices, but
I don't think I have actually.
For those that may not have come across it, it's essentially a secure online tool, and it supports anyone working at and around the bar to confidentially raise concerns about abusive behaviour or inappropriate behaviour. So that's one initiative that, the Bar Council have put in place. There's also the Wellbeing at the Bar Hub that provides guidance, direction, resources. Something that it includes is the assistance programme, and that's a confidential service which is offered 24/7, and you can call it to discuss emotional or practical or personal problems with access to counselling to deal with career support generally or problems or harassment. So again, a useful kind of resource to know about. The Bar Council page actually has lots of wellbeing resources, particularly for barristers under 7 years cool. So going back to kind of what I was talking about earlier, very, very junior practitioners.
And something I would just like to know from someone who is not a practicing barrister, just individually, obviously you both have very, very busy practices. So how do you what are your practical strategies for managing stress in reality? Because I know we can all say things that we'd like to do to be able to have a good work-life balance, but what actually keeps you grounded on a somewhat regular basis?
I mean, I'll start that. I think one of the things about this job is it's not a typical 9-to-5 job. It's not a situation whereby when you finish at 5, you can just sort of clock out and not think about work. I think it almost turns into, or you have to try and avoid it, but it can sometimes turn into a 24-hour job, because even if you're finishing off after court and you're doing obviously work in the evening, but even when you're not working, you're still sometimes thinking about cases. I mean, I very often have situations where, even though I'm lying in bed going to sleep, I'm tossing and turning, thinking about cases, about certain strategies or tactics, or, why didn't I do this or why didn't I do that? And you find yourself in that kind of situation. I always find probably the first strategy for me is just prioritizing physical health. So, from my own personal point, I go to the gym, and I also have taken up climbing recently as a new activity and stuff. And I always make sure I'm trying to prioritize at the very least, at least an hour, where I can just fully switch off and concentrate on something completely different. And then it allows me then to, if I then have to do some work in some cases in the evening, and obviously just enter back into that headspace, I feel a little bit more refreshed and a little bit more recharged, really.
And how about you, Anushka?
Something that I've started very recently is actually not having emails on my phone. I have only done it very recently, so we'll see whether it makes too much of a difference or not. But I do know colleagues that that don't have them on their phone. And I think, and now, we're on our phones all the time. Having access to kind of that constant stream of emails is maybe occupying too much headspace. But I think that's definitely, I'm pleased I've tried it at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. My colleague Bella, she does that now as a strategy. She absolutely loves it, and she really kind of advocates for it, to be fair. I've done it a little bit. I have actually enjoyed it at times. I don't know why I had to switch back on my emails for something and I've forgotten to take it off, but maybe I'll delve back into that strategy. Because you don't actually have to always keep an eye on your emails round the clock, really. You can just periodically check in when you've got a bit of time and space. But I think sometimes when you're like relaxing and eating dinner or watching TV and stuff like that with someone else in your home and an email pops up, sometimes your mind goes a bit adrift, and actually taking your emails off your phone kind of avoids something like that happening. So that at least when you do prioritize a bit of downtime for yourself, your mind is just fully dedicated to that downtime.
I think it goes back to that element of kind of from the pandemic where there was almost that shift to an instantaneous communication kind of stream. And I think email before, you used to be able to take up to several hours to reply to emails if you wanted to. But I think since COVID and since maybe some more communication through the likes of Teams, etc., there's become more of an expectation to reply to things instantly, which I think is where some of the problems may lie. But I know from my experience, obviously I'm not talking as a barrister, but I have my email app on my phone, however, I turn my notifications off. So it's still there if I need to access it and when I want to have a look and check in, but I'm not getting constant notifications coming through, which has definitely helped. So yeah, I think it's just important to set those boundaries, isn't it? So that you can switch off at least for short periods of time.
Anushka, I've got another question for you. I think in terms of, and probably just delving more from your own personal experience as a barrister, of course, in terms of managing your workload, I mean, how are you able to set boundaries in terms of your workload? Do you do that, or do you even feel like you can set boundaries in terms of your workload?
I have got fantastic clerks, actually, and I've been very lucky with that. And I have got better, I think, at booking in things like prep days. I didn't really do that at the start of my practice, but I think that has helped, and I would kind of encourage everybody to look at their diary and see where they can build in that time, because the prep for, particularly at the family bar, it's a lot, and if you can try to do it within the working week rather than at the weekends, I think that definitely does help. I would say that is a change that when I think about when I first started practicing, that is something that I am now much better at, which I really wasn't very good at when I first started out. I don't know whether that's something that you've experienced, Andrea, or not.
Yeah, I think, I've tried probably from the get-go to try and prioritize a couple of prep days. I probably have done it. It was a bit of a learning curve for me at the very beginning, but I've slowly learned actually you always have to keep one eye on the diary at all times, because actually if you just take your eye off it and then you're rolling into next week and you find out you're juggling all sorts of hearings without actually taking a bit of that time, sometimes it can put you in a bit of a tough situation. I actually think as well, prep days, I mean, obviously a lot of barristers might have a bit of anxiety because obviously that's the day that you're not working. But actually, if you, on the flip side, if you're actually taking a bit more time to focus on your cases and also yourself, I find actually the quality of your work tends to be a lot better, because with the bundles that sometimes we are dealing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of bundles. And so if you're in a situation where you've got your back against the wall in terms of your diary, because you're obviously juggling so many hearings, you might be spreading your efforts a little bit too thin, really. So I think not only prep days don't only just bring a well-being benefit as well. I think they can bring a professional benefit as well, because it always ensures that you're dedicating as much time as possible to prepping your cases, so you're always going in well prepared.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think an element that we'd like to focus on specifically, because at UNIT we really pride ourselves on supporting the next generation of kind of aspiring barristers and barristers coming through, is how do you think, and especially from your perspective, Anushka, working with the young bar, what do you think chambers need to be doing in order to kind of set up and prepare aspiring barristers and pupil barristers coming in for the reality of what life is like as a busy barrister, but also what they can put in place, I guess, from an early stage in order to help them manage their workloads moving forward?
Sorry, do you mean what can we put in place within chambers to help?
I guess in chambers and maybe just across the board from just from the younger perspective, like what can we be doing to ensure that their mental health is kind of kept in a good place as they go through and as they learn and as they develop, and what we can continue to do to support them?
Yeah, I mean, from some research that was collected by the Bar Council, remote working in particular, it seemed to disproportionately negatively affect pupils and the young bar. So when I say the young bar, I mean those under 7 years cool. A piece of work that the Young Bar did in response to that was to put together some guidance in 2023, and it was to do with remote working. That I think a lot of those are really applicable, particularly now with hybrid working. So a huge amount of that is relevant now. And there are lots of tips in there for chambers looking to support their more junior practitioners. But things like having a buddy scheme in place, encouraging juniors to be part of marketing events and articles so that their visibility is increased, making sure there are remote working facilities in chambers, communal working spaces, so that when more junior practitioners come in, they've got people to meet, talk to, bounce ideas off. And, if it's possible to have sort of remote channels of communication, whether that's by phone or group chats or what have you, so that, people have someone to go to if they need help or support. But I think also kind of mentoring schemes in general, both in and out of chambers, they don't have to be, limited to chambers, are really helpful. I mean, that's something that I have done a bit of mentoring, and hopefully my mentees found it valuable. but I found it very valuable in terms of being a mentor, and really enjoyed it, actually. And, you don't have to be really senior to get involved with that. Actually, I think there's a huge amount of value in having a mentor or a buddy who's junior and kind of relatively recently gone through it themselves.
Yeah, I think it's essential to have mentor relationships as well, because I think sometimes it's not just about the amount of work that you're doing as a pupil, but also just about the topics that you're covering, and of course, like running your own cases on behalf of your clients. And sometimes I confess I've had those experiences myself. You always get yourself into a bit more of a stressful and anxious state, really, because obviously, there are so many variables you sometimes think, but sometimes actually just having a mentor who can give you advice, but also just a reality check, really, it helps to I think that's a hugely beneficial thing personally, because then it starts to alleviate and to take the stress away from the situation that you're in.
Yeah, I think, I have been so lucky with my chambers, who have been so incredibly supportive. And I was very lucky. I did a third six at the chambers that I'm at the moment. And my mentors, Catherine Bishkolti and Aisha Hassan, were, completely invaluable. And I think to be able to give something back by way of mentoring is really nice if you're able to do it. And actually, I think people are often put off thinking it takes a lot of time, etc., but it doesn't really at all. And yeah, as I say, I think it can be really valuable.
Can I just ask, in terms of sort of practical solutions for people who are listening, we're obviously working through cases. How do you think it's the best approach to try and spot burnout early, and what to do if you feel like you are struggling?
I think I am sometimes, when I talk to sort of young practitioners in particular, or even not necessarily that young, I am surprised that they don't know about some of the resources that are available, particularly through the Bar Council. And I know I've touched on some of those, but I think spreading awareness of that, is really important, because there are things that people can go to outside the chambers that are run by the Bar Council that could help. And it really is a real main priority for the Bar Council, to improve well-being amongst barristers. I think burnout in itself, it can take so many forms, can't it? I think if you're feeling very overwhelmed, exhausted, anxious, it can have a physical effect as well, changes in appetite, etc. I think knowing that you're not alone in that it's not abnormal, but trying to speak to somebody within chambers or through the Bar Council is probably the first step. It may be that you need time out, etc., but that's nothing to be ashamed of. Ultimately, as I sort of said before, it's no good having people burnt out and exhausted in chambers. That's not helpful to anybody, and nobody would want somebody to be suffering in that way. So I think trying to spot those signs, but it's amazing. I think a lot of people don't even know what those signs are. So I kind of think spreading awareness about A, what's out there to support barristers, and B, what sort of symptoms you need to be looking out for is maybe the starting point.
Yeah, I think as well, I think it's making sure that you're putting your cards on the table with your clerks so they know what you're going through. So of course, and then, part of their job as well is to see, well, okay, if you feel like things are going a little bit too much and stuff, what can they do to try and support you, to try and ease the workload off, really?
Yeah.
I think I have kind of one final question to kind of sum up the episode, and this is posed to the two of you, really. Do you think that being a barrister and well-being can actually coexist together?
I think so, yeah.
Or does it kind of come based on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
I think it's possible, because the bottom line is you are a self-employed practitioner. So you're the person that's running your own cases. You are building your own practice. And so you will always have a steer over which direction you want to go in. Mm-hmm. I think it's a path that's very complicated, because there are a lot of factors to keep in play. Making sure that you're a team player at Chambers, making sure that, you're giving the best possible service to, your solicitors, your clients. And also the fact is that you want to always make sure that you are walking towards a situation where you're building a successful reputation, really. So I think it's a complicated path, but I think it's definitely possible. The bottom line is it starts with you just setting the boundaries for yourself, really.
Do you think that there's almost a fear or a worry as a self-employed barrister about taking a step back and taking a break? Because obviously you're running your own business at the end of the day. So do you think that there is a worry and a concern about taking that time out? Because I know I've spoken to quite a few people in Chambers, and they've mentioned the kind of fear of not having anything in their diary or that side of things. Is there a concern there that then stops you taking those breaks and those kind of time outs?
I think it definitely exists. I think a lot of people, who've done the job for a very long time have probably been conditioned into that kind of approach. But I also think as well, I think we're at the cusp, hopefully, of a positive change in the profession, because I think well-being is being treated far more seriously as an issue, and even as recently now with the Bar Council in terms of the direction they want to take. So I'm hoping that there will be some change into that. But I think definitely there are people who do have that fear that's still there. And I guess it's just a case of changing that thinking.
Do you think they can coexist, Anushka?
I think they can, yes. But I don't think that there's a silver bullet answer to that. And I think the reality is that everybody has a different capacity for what they can take on, and also their own ability to sort of put in boundaries and stress levels as well. That's very much on an individual basis, isn't it? So for every person, it's probably going to look different. But, I think very much from a Bar Council perspective, it's a particularly key priority for Barbara Miller's KC this year, and she has said in her address she wants to enhance well-being and ensure it's not something that's only considered at the point of crisis. She said she wants to make well-being something that's regarded by barristers as a non-negotiable, really, like having an accountant or insurance. And I think if we can achieve that, certainly practice may well be much more sustainable across the board.
All right, well, thank you very much, Anushka. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you very much, Danny, as well.
You're on, Dad.
Thanks everybody for listening to this podcast. You can subscribe and share this episode to help normalise wellbeing discussions in the legal sector, and we hope you've been enjoying this episode. You can, of course, visit links in terms of support and resources. That includes Wellbeing at the Bar, which we can include in the captions for our episodes. And please feel free to join the conversation. I mean, what wellbeing strategies work for you? Comment and share on your experiences.
On the next episode of Family Law and More, we put Lisa Edmonds, Barrister of the Year, in the hot seat. Join us for an interview.